then we'll move into a Q&A, so all our speakers will be at the front. Have a bit of a roundtable session, and then we're going to go into some breakouts after that point to sort of meet each other, and discuss some of our own research and our own sort of innovative solutions and what we've done. Do these presentations, and then we'll come back for plenary. Sound okay? That's what we're doing, so that's good. So, to start with, we have got a screening of Huron, the people of the sea, the Top Nars People Search for Human Rights and Recognition. This is a documentary produced by the One Ocean Hub, and it's based on the ongoing research with members of the Top Nar community in Namibia. There's been input from Namibian One Ocean Hub researchers as well. The idea is that through producing this, it's explore the power of visual tools in communicating rights and recognition, both on global and national platforms surrounding human rights and recognition, surrounding marine governance especially. It's not necessarily representing the Top Nar community as a whole, but providing a perspective from the youth of the Top Nar community, and specifically Glenn Casper and his journey as an emerging local activist, cultural worker and youth leader.
We are scared that we will be again forced out, like we were forced out from the coastal parts, from our ancestral lands, to experience what our elders experienced. Those are the things that I'm scared of having no voice.
Uritse, kai kamtse. Uritse, sita, auni twadati, kai out. Auba, ma tare. Orobeba, ma tare, sa.
Tungu ge hao. Osna ku hunga ngabage ai. Ge ha ge hoda. Uri amka. Se ngabada ge ngana sida tamike. Tikuda ge ngana sida ge kren. Sanfes habe dirame bada ge mir maska miran wa tiku ko gutuka ni abane ngari ma tini ha ma to titi sata hum it abage ngai kun naita permits ka sini ka ti permits ai kunin ngari tin te basket ka ngati ko an ge chung sa kuna ha ma ge harasa kondi ko danya korage khupha da ge gorat ba disi da ge rabi kauga de ba dorong kubi de ba khutski disa ai ska tskire kwa
that our ancestors used to catch fish freely without any laws or permits. We can't anymore access our land or even go and visit our ancestors' graves. It's a very sad thing.
Common clams skin is a home kaisin and wa. This is a one wooden one. This is a kind of gayu. I give with the last kind aroma by a say.
Who had Hase? Tui Samese. Ubu say. Auni Goradi, Kaike Aussie. Kai is Daisy.
How nasi digami o daging ngabahura gorai. O daging nama nahura no nama nahusa darat karanama. Kain tia wan am sabasi kinesa. Tikin ngaran ngoma ba, tipin ngaran ngoma bara somwa.
Our rights are very limited, and we are living in a very limited jurisdiction of our community in the Namib Desert. There is no representative for the Top Nar, and we are not recognized by the government. Laws, policies are being made by the high bodies, but they don't see the people on the ground. I saw the need of preserving my culture. So it was like a search for the heritage and the culture of the Top Knot from the few elders that is left in our community. I drove from settlement to settlement, interviewed elders, slept over with them, sat around the fire as it used has to be done. But the most important thing is that I must pass it on so that the culture doesn't die out. People are not aware of the Top Knot.
Traditional councillors have had opportunities to sit in the same meeting with decision makers from the Ministries of Fisheries and Marine Resources, and that hasn't happened before. Even yesterday we had a discussion with the chairperson of the MSP for Namibia, mentioning that culture and heritage is going to be part of MSP going forward, specifically mentioning the Top Knot community.
Gates Grau Oige Hanup Ta Umi Twidi Chin Kobi Mamasip China Taraka Chin Awasinske Umida Noha here Dagamon Place Tin Ice H Mamabasin Aros Place AC Place.
The future is a little bit scary. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We trust and hope that the future will bring better voices in policy making. We are hopeful that the future will bring upliftment for the community.
So afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Good. Okay, yeah. So my research in Namibia at the moment focuses on the lived social and environmental histories of exclusion and resilience in the arid Namibian coast, and specifically connected to the harbor town of Walvis Bay and the surrounding area. And I'm doing so from the situated perspective of co-research with members of the Tsaunan community, who are also known as the Top Knot. It's a small but diverse and scattered community who are recognized as the descendants of the first inhabitants of the Namibian coast. And as you saw now here represented in the Hurinen film that they just screened. So over the past decades, the Tsaunan community leaders and activists have really fought for their recognition and rights, including through mobilizing what we can say a resurgent Topanar identity and indigenous identity as well. And these struggles, including for rights to access to land and economic and political inclusion, are taking place in a context where many such rights continue to be denied. So within the context of the hub, a critical research for development let's say, dimension that was identified in consultation with the communities was really for amplifying the Kaunen's coastal heritage, specifically their historical and cultural connections to the ocean and to coastal places. So why was this need there? Or let's say, what is the broader context within which we have to consider this story? So before detailing a little bit more about the work that we are doing as a hub together with the Kaunen community, let us quickly just zoom out a little bit in the Namibian context. So within Namibia, there's still a very deeply entrenched assumption that the ocean, and by extension the coast, is empty of social actors and cultural claims. The consequence of this is that decisions are being made both in marine and coastal governance, excluding coastal communities. For example, with debates on land and resource access, ownership and benefit sharing still quite silenced. These assumptions are shaped, let's say, partially by the fact that most of the coast is hyper-arid, the Namib Desert, and it's quite rugged as well, with only 2 natural harbors along its 1,500 kilometer long stretch of coastline. Thank you. So in addition to the arid coast, most of the coastline is also divided into four national parks. As a result, most of the coastal population are concentrated in the urban areas, including most of the Kaunen, who for generations already have deep roots in Walvis Bay, including in terms of coastal belonging and urban livelihoods. At the same time, however, the case of the Kaunen community is very unique, and that they are one of the few communities in Namibia residing in 2 national parks, the Namib Naukluft and the Dorop National Parks, as was noted in the film, and you can also see here on the map. And weaving through these parks is the ephemeral Kwisep River and Delta, along which the Kaunen and their ancestors before them have constituted pastoral and marine livelihoods for more than 2,000 years. In contemporary Namibia, however, many still struggle for their customary land rights to be recognized within these parks, and their tenure remain legally insecure. In addition, many of these parks include coastal places which now have become restricted areas, and their formation and history stretch back to colonial times, sorry. So the establishment of these parks have also rewritten the landscape, especially the coastal belt, rather as a natural space, in many cases erasing the cultural and social histories in these landscapes. So as a result, many in the community continue to struggle for that recognition, as well as for intersecting land and resource rights. And when the hub stepped into the picture, these struggles were ongoing, but it was also recognized that really what would help this process is better recognition for the Kaunen's coastal heritage specifically. So in response, a youth and grassroots-driven cultural heritage project was funded by the hub. As you saw in the film, this project was called the Hurinin Project, and it's headed and coordinated by Mr. Glenn Cuthbert. The name comes from a sub-clan identity, the Hurinin, who were particular families or lineages specifically connected to former fishing traditions and coastal places. So the name of the film itself refers to this journey of trying to revitalize older identities connected to the ocean, as it refers to the people of the sea. So in terms of methodology, my work has also been trying to build ways to co-research with the youth, as well as other colleagues in the hub, in trying to understand these histories of displacement and exclusion, but also towards supporting their human rights struggles in this context. So just to give an example, these histories of displacement are quite complex. As I mentioned, technically a lot of the communities still reside in Walvis Bay at the coast, but they still perceive there's a widespread perception of displacement. So the question is really how did the urban and conservation histories contribute to these lived experiences of exclusion? Through our research and working also with the youth, the question here also is, how do we understand and define the coastal zone in Namibia? These definitions are quite critical because they speak to these intersecting questions of coastal belonging and rights to access, including rights to access in terms of land, but also former places that might have cultural significance. And in terms of impact trajectories, the question is also, how do we really engage with these histories and with the knowledges attached to them? So apart from the film that you've watched now, we've also been partnering up with the National Theatre of Namibia. We're busy, or which they are busy now, producing an applied theatre piece together with the Ghanaian community. And the goal really is to build on this ongoing conversation and to open up the dialogue, but also to reinsert social actors and local voices into larger decision-making processes, which, as I mentioned, is really critical for human rights concerns in this context. You can put up the second slide now. So maybe just to situate it also in a bit of a wider context still, as I mentioned, we are dealing here with a context still deeply shaped by and scarred by colonial and apartheid legacies. However, these legacies are also being entrenched in different ways by the dominance of neoliberal and extractive-based economies here, which are fueling multiple risks for hazardous and toxic presents and futures, but also for further exclusion and inequalities. As you can see here on this map, prospecting and mining licenses cover a large part of the adjoining land and seascapes. And generally speaking, little to no consultation with local communities have taken place in the allocation of these licenses. These industries are also intersecting with the mainly export-based commercial fisheries industry, in which decisions are being made quite in very untransparent ways, and without considerations for free and informed consent. Within this context that you see here, perpetuating ideas of an empty coastal land area and of the ocean as an empty frontier, ready for further exploitation, really drives pathways towards further unsustainability. So in this context, we're really looking at solutions for sustainable development that are better rooted in cultural values and shared meaning making. This is critical for collective imagination of alternative pasts, but also futures, and also for taking on a human rights approach against current and future injustices in Namibia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elsami. Next up, we have Elisa Morgera, who is Professor of Environmental Law at the University of Strathclyde, Director of the One Ocean Hub, and recently named UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change.
Thank you all for being here today, and I'll just take a few minutes to contextualize what has already been, I think, incredible research that Elsami shared with you, both in terms of the topics, the methods, where we're trying to go with the research in the broader context of the One Ocean Hub. Next, which I had the privilege to work with for the past 6 years, together with several colleagues across South Africa, Namibia, and Ghana, but also 2 regional universities in the South Pacific and the Caribbean, and really trying to bring together, which Elsami already alluded to, natural sciences, social sciences, and legal research to try and understand where there are disconnections, if not complete wrong assumptions about human well-being dependent on a healthy ocean, and how decisions living out the rights, the perspective, the knowledge of those who have an even closer relationship to the ocean from a cultural, social, and other perspective leads to sustainable decision making. And I think what has been really an incredible journey also for myself was really understanding the role of the arts. And we've seen, you know, the movie itself. You've heard from Elsami engagement with the National Theatre. And there's been many other work in Ghana where we have been able to experience how art itself is research. It has accompanied us in very difficult paths of challenging each other in our own understanding, and both the achievements that each discipline has reached, but also the limitations. We try to understand where, within our own understanding, those limitations come from, and then finding a place where, with very difficult conversation, we often became also ideological conversations, and in a way, identity conversations around our role as researchers and the role of our work in sustainable development found a place of almost transcendence, where we were able to understand each other and ourselves in different ways and see how the challenges, the tensions coming from the findings and the methods used, say, in deep sea research, as opposed to those in legal research or sociology and anthropology, were really a place where we could together imagine a different way to work together. And so this is an example, for instance, of an animation that our colleagues in South Africa developed, and particularly led by Dr. Hilal Megari and colleagues in the EPA Theatre Collective. And what you see here is a combination of very deep, years and years of deep sea science research that other colleagues in South Africa had carried out, together with some understanding of Zulu traditions, the journey of the soul through the global life, the global water cycle, particularly going into the depth of the oceans. And this was due to an engagement with different groups of indigenous and local knowledge holders in South Africa who shared their connections to the oceans. And through that connections, our understanding of how, for instance, to protect the seabed, which is again an area where most people assume we have no human connections. There's never been any human activity, and yes, it's so crucial to their culture. And I think what we understood, and particularly in my case as an international environmental and human rights lawyer, was the deep engagement with culture really allowed to understand fully how other human rights were being disregarded and in fact in some cases violated, and particularly access to information, access to participation, having a meaningful voice in the decisions that had knock-on effects, not only on cultural rights, but also socioeconomic rights. And the reason I'm showing this slide is that what has happened during the life of the hub, I think unexpected to us all in a relatively short period of time, is that this kind of evidence, the art pieces that were produced and that were synthesizing interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research, were used as evidence in courts. In South Africa, some of our researchers working in solidarity with indigenous knowledge holders and small-scale fishers were successful in blocking already issued licenses for offshore oil and gas exploration through sound blasting systems. And the judges recognized, first of all, the cultural rights. They said, well, for some people in South Africa, their ancestors dwell on the seabed, and that is relevant. That means that they have cultural rights, and that the misrecognition of those rights meant that they should have been included in the process of decisions on providing these licenses in the first place. There were a series of decisions. The researchers were successful, and of course the communities. And I think what that has taught us and what we're still exploring is how important that connection across all these sciences, and seeing art as a part of making science, co-producing knowledge, but also engaging others, decision makers, judges, international negotiators, which is the case in this slide, are changes the way we can connect with one another. And I think one of the challenges we see time and again in sustainable development is how people know all these issues. They know that we need to talk to those left out. We know that we need to engage with other systems. We know that we have to find a way to go ahead with more sustainable approaches. But at the end of the day, we always go into a meeting room with our ideas preformed. We might change slightly, maybe, but we never really move very much away from our initial position. And what we have experienced with a few also experiments at the Climate COP, at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in New York, in this case in Rome, and then in this case, the UN in New York on World Oceans Day, is that even creating a very small space, in this case, it was a 5-minute live performance together with the showing of the animation, can change a room, can change the minds of people, and opening them up to understand maybe with other cognitive skills than their rational skills, that connection, that complexity of what the natural sciences are saying about what we need to do to protect the environment, what the social sciences are saying about the human stakes, the human connections, what Indigenous peoples and other knowledge holders have already known, and we haven't been listening properly, and engaging with that in a way that is empathic, that is imaginative, that opens that space for learning from one another, accepting to be challenged, and imagine something different. And so what's been an opportunity for us today, and hopefully in the few months ahead, is that while we've seen really important openings for very difficult agendas related to the ocean, from deep seabed mining to offshore oil and gas, to tourism development, to conservation, the same methodologies, the same idea of rethinking research practices as a way to open up a whole new approach to developing solutions is applicable in many other areas. And in fact, again, without having planned it, we have been able to contribute to global processes on climate change, on global health. And we have a sense that this approach can really be very helpful also in thinking about co-developing technologies, business models. There's a very strong sense of the transformative potential of this work. It's been quite experiential for us. We're still learning, and I think distilling the learning and sharing it with others. And we're hoping that today, with the conversation we'll have with all of you, we'll keep better understanding what we have been able to achieve and where else we might go, potentially with new partnerships in exploring this transformative potential. I'll leave it there, and we'll hear more about One Ocean Hub work also from other colleagues in the panel.
Thank you, Elisa. Our next speaker is Jeremy Lauer, who is a Professor of Management Science in the Strathclyde Business School and co-founder of Nourish, which I think we'll hear a little bit about.
Thanks very much, David, and thank you, Elsa and Elisa. I'm a professor in management science at Strathclyde. Before that, I was 25 years at the World Health Organization as an economist. So I came here from a non-academic track and came here during the pandemic and trying to find my way. One of the things I am involved in, and you'll see listed as my affiliation, is Planet Health, which is a kind of a roving think-do tank that I would be remiss in mentioning Planet Health, not to mention my wife and co-founder, Jordan Shannon, who's here with us as a guiding force in everything that I'm speaking about today. So Planet Health, one of its offshoots as a think-do tank is in fact this platform Nourish, which is nurturing outcomes and understanding through reciprocal learning and indigenous systems thinking for health equity and climate change. And what I want to bring attention to here is the global platform that we have to support. We have in the midmost part of the ocean, Ohio Tonga, we have in the Antipodes, an Aboriginal learning and mentorship program. We have in the subcontinent, Egypt, which is a very dynamic NGO, health-based NGO in India, Health and Environment. And we have in the pastoralist region of Kenya, Mama. We have, should be, I believe, the Deakin University, also in Australia with Indigenous systems learning. I see that was Quran, Etua, based in the Andes in the South America. We in the world, coastal farmers and urban organizers in the United States, and Village of the Future in the Tlingit region of Alaska. Now, I started with Tonga and I ended with Alaska, and it's an artifact of this map that they look as though they're opposite, because they're really connected through the vast Pacific Ocean. And that's a dimension that has emerged out of really what didn't start as ocean-based learning, but started in a slightly different planetary and health-based learning. And the ocean, of course, is what quickly emerges from that. So we have Patrick Anderson, our Tlingit leader, Tanya Herrera, Quechua youth leader, Lillian Noella Koski, Pokat representative, Willie Lucy, Tongan climate advocate, Tyson Yunkaporta, indigenous scholar, and Chels Marshall, an ecologist. So next slide, please. There's a couple of, three things, really not a couple, but there's a trio of things that I want to say about this slide, and which is that the first one, we start with a two-eyed vision, right? We have two eyes and we should use them. And in this sense, what it means, of course, is Western rationalist-based learning and vision, but then indigenous knowledge and indigenous systems thinking, and not making a commitment to one or the other, keeping that parallax, right? Keeping those different perspectives, the integrity of the different perspectives. So two-eyed learning, two-eyed lens, participatory learning and action. Not going in with preformed ideas, but letting the objectives, the methods emerge from a participatory process. And finally, and here where my heart is, I must say, it's really Jordan's insight and work, but the bringing that up through trans-local learning, building the superstructure so that those different place-based learnings can find a way to generalize and synthesize across place, and more importantly, integrate into policy frameworks and action.
Next up, we have Bahari Kamranzad, who is a Chancellor's Fellow in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, head of the Coastal Engineering and Ocean Climate Research Group, and a leader within the Strathclyde Centre for Doctoral Training and AI-based ocean forecasts for marine operations.
Hello everyone, I'm Bahara, and thank you very much for having me involved in this meeting today. It's a pleasure to talk to you. So, as David mentioned, my topic is oceanography and coastal engineering, but how we can use that to improve the life of coastal community, the quality of life of coastal community. So this is one idea. We all know about the energy crisis and climate change. And we know that the countries have committed to net zero emissions by different pipelines. And one of the measures to reach those net zero emissions is the use of renewable energies. But we also know that about 40% of the world populations are living within 100 kilometers of a coastline. So coastal areas where we have access to the ocean energy would be a suitable place to capture the energy from the ocean sources to provide for the coastal community. However, these areas are also subject to climate change. The climate change may cause coastal disasters because more than 10% of the world population lives in coastal areas with which are like below 10 meter below the sea level. So they are could be dangerous. They are vulnerable to increasing sea level or increasing storminess. So coastal disasters, as I mentioned, here we just consider flood impact, because coastal disasters could be tsunamis, but we can't do anything about them for now. So the idea is to use these ocean renewables for preventing coastal disaster. But how? Ocean renewables, you may have heard about offshore wind or different types of them. So as I mentioned, the mechanism is to capture the energy from the ocean to generate electricity. When they capture that energy, that means that less energy is reaching the coastline, right? So that could be a solution to coastal protection. So basically, ocean renewables contribute to two things. First, because we are generating electricity, so we are using less fossil fuels, so we are decreasing the carbon emissions, right? And then the second is by effect, by reducing coastal erosion, which is the result of increasing storminess and so they are another major advantage of them is the adaptation. Because if we install these kind of devices, these are very beneficial, for instance. So if we install these devices in areas around the coastal area, so these devices are usually submerged or floating, so they can easily be adapted to sea level rise. So this is in contrast with our conventional types of coastal protection, which are fixed structures or hard engineering, and they are not easily adaptable to sea level rise. So this is another advantage for using ocean renewable energies. And as I mentioned, as well as power generation, we can use them for other purposes, for desalination, for hydrogen production, pumping and heating purposes. Different types of devices can also create some other source of energy, and also for coastal protection. So this was the advantage of using ocean renewable energy, not only for generating electricity, for increasing population in the coastal area, but also to protect them. That's all.
Thank you very much, Marie. Next up, we have Lisa Winnie, who is a One Ocean Hub PhD researcher at the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance.
Good morning, everyone. I recently arrived in Glasgow a few weeks ago. We live in a world where we embrace each other, but mostly through technology, social media, Instagram, Twitter, for those who like more the professional circle, LinkedIn. It gives us that instantaneous gratification to be liked, that our thoughts are liked. But it also distances us. Without physical connection, we cannot connect no more deeply. Now imagine a different kind of life. Let me take you to my village. Kids traveling to school by canoe. Kids living in villages. Today, I think it's very sunny. My village is in Lower Lagoon in Solomon Islands. It's spread across 23 kilometers of water, adjacent to a mainland. Now the mainland is called the Tolo, or the bush, the highlands, which also means the people who live on the Tolo are different from the people who live in the sea. Their way of life, their practice, their culture is shaped by the land around them, the life around them. The people in the sea, or the children in the sea, are called the Imolayasi, people of and from the sea. They have built this way of life, building man-made islands, about 50 of them, littered across this lagoon. And they have shaped their language, which is different from the Bush language. And they have shaped their knowledge and their practice and their laws according to their interaction with the sea. There was one point in my life, I was a marine scientist, I worked in the policy, And my experience in policy making made me realize that I'm working on something that is ignoring this. I was leading a marine spatial planning program for the Solomon Islands. And through that process, we were designing scientific protocols. We were designing consultation processes that includes rooms and inviting one person at a time. We were doing approaches that did not match with reality. And I am from this place. And what is more scarier is I am the one telling them that your life doesn't matter. And at the time, I met Elsa. And I shared how uncomfortable I am and how unsettling it was for me leading that process. And she said, why don't you work on it? Why don't you do a research and understand how better to do this? So for me, the work so far is not about having a thesis. It's about transforming the way I have been doing things. And I started off by going back to I went back to my mother, who's from here. I said, teach me, tell me, how can I connect this to sin? Because Solomon Islands is just an indigenous state. And why are we not acting it? And she taught me. She said, two things you will do. How will you carry out your methodology? One, famantay. Let the people around you teach you. It means policymakers, your own colleagues, let you do those reflections together. It's about Pacific scholars who have been writing about this. Let them teach you. And so I sat at their feet, the likes of Professor Konai Helwith, Welshman Tudeo, Kabini Sanga. I sat at their feet and listened. I sat at my elders' feet. Famantay is a critical methodology to unlearn. Second, wununo. Talk to each other, create relationships, reconnect yourself to this. I spent a lot of my time just telling stories with myself. Wununo. Telling stories with policymakers. We reflected, and we talked, and we shared. For me, that's transdisciplinary. Let's break down the walls. Let's talk to each other. Let's have that relationship. Then we will transform the ocean.
Thank you, Lisa. And our final speaker for this morning is Tracy Morse, who is a Professor of Environmental Health, focusing on community-based preventive health solutions in low-income settings. Her work is primarily focused in sub-Saharan Africa for the last 25 years, where she has worked on water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions, using a combination of behaviour-centred approaches with appropriate technological development.
You know, I feel terrible. We should have finished on Lisa there. That was an absolutely perfect way to finish. And I think that unlearning is something that I learned to do sitting in Malawi for 20 years, making lots of mistakes. To start with, going into rooms thinking you knew what the solutions were for some of these challenges, and learning very quickly that no one was interested in the solutions that you had. They had other problems going on in their lives and wanted to talk about it as well. So just very briefly going to take you through an example of some of the research that I've done with colleagues across Malawi and institutions there, really led by Malawian colleagues and our co-researchers. And I think other colleagues mentioned co-researchers being members of the community, I think it's before, that you're trying to support and help and improve their lives. And that's very much how we now work in a lot of the things that we do as well. So focusing in on water, I always feel like I have to give a bit of context at the beginning. I'm cheating a wee bit. I'm not talking about the ocean. I'm talking about water though. So we're thinking about drinking water for, 2.2 billion people in the world still don't have access to safely managed water. That's the reality that we live in on a day-to-day basis. 114 million of them collect water in situations like this. Open water sources, rivers, lakes. And this is where they are water drinking on a day-to-day basis, often without treatment, because if they don't have access to effective water, the likelihood is they also don't have income efficient enough for them to be able to treat water as well. That's just not a priority within that house. And there's lots of solutions that we see come into these lovely settings where people say helicopter in or seagull in their lovely technologies and different things that they think will fix the lives of impoverished Malawians and things along the way. But very rarely do technologies that are offered as solutions actually involve talking to the communities or the end users of that technology and make sure that it's efficient or appropriate or acceptable to be used there as well. So that's why we were doing this piece of work, was to look at whether some very cheaply available technologies could be acceptable in order to treat drinking water in these situations. So what were we doing? We were using something called solar water disinfection, or SODIS. The sun is incredibly efficient in lots of things. It gives us energy, it gives us lots of good stuff, but it can also be used to treat contaminated water in a clear plastic bottle and make it safe to drink, which sounds bonkers. And even if that water still looks dirty, in many ways, it is actually safe to consume. Now, how many of us would put our drinking water bottle out in the sun for 6 hours and then happily pick it up and drink it when it still looked brown at the end? Very few of us, I think. Oh, Jeremy's the exception. Very few of us would be willing to do that, I think, in reality. But that's often what we're expecting to ask people to do, but we're asking them to use things like solar water disinfection. So you fill your water, fill your bottles, put them on your roof or whatever, leave them for 6 hours. After that, all the bacteria are killed. But there's more to drinking water than just whether there are bacteria that we can't see are safe to drink. We have to think about what it looks like, what it tastes like. What's the convenience of having to fill lots of bottles and put them on my roof? I steal my bottles, I have to buy those bottles from somewhere as well. So there's lots and lots of reasons why SODIS has not taken off as an effective water treatment solution across the tropics region where it's most effective. So what we wanted to do was look at, well, can it be made into an effective solution? What are the key barriers to use, to uptake, and can we adjust the technology itself to be more appropriate? So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we sat down, sometimes in rooms, but with everyone that we possibly could to talk to. So right from your government, central government, who would be concerned about the safety of plastic sitting in the sun, for example. Right through to community members, such as these ladies who make fantastic clay pots in the community. We wanted to see how we could use clay pots to clean the water, make it look more palatable before we treat it with solar disinfection. And we wanted to talk to communities about how we produce it. Interestingly, it's always good fun. The women make the pots, but as soon as there was the potential for income generation from the pots being made, the men were very interested in whether they could make it. Well, we work with local manufacturers to produce bigger containers, so plastic buckets that were more resistant to UV, so they could sit out in the sun, but treat 20 litres of water instead of 500 mils or 2 litres. So I then had decent amount of water to test. We work with scientists, we work with arts and illustrators to draw and help with those things. We work with community-based drama groups to help explore and discuss what the challenges might be as well. And at the end of the day, what we ended up with was a 20-litre bucket. Great, something that's already available in the community, but has now been adapted scientifically effective. Not a clay cover, because actually really cumbersome and very slow to filter. So rather a cloth filter that you can see over on the side here that the ladies developed and prepared and themselves in the community, and a leaflet that helped bring in all of the nudges, the behaviour-centred approaches, the ways in which we felt people would want to change. So if I come and tell a community, a lady, you want to use this bucket to treat your water because your child won't have diarrhoea. Chances are she'll say to me, my kid's going to have diarrhoea anyway, because they're going to eat a mango that's fallen on the floor, or they're going to do all these other things. So they're going to have it anyway. This is not going to help me. Go away with your technology. But what we found, the motive was much stronger, was this is what success looks like for your child. This is your child graduating from school because they've had a healthier upbringing, safe water to drink. It's made them stronger. And that was the way that helped women to see that, yeah, this is something I want to do. I want success for my children. And we're all responsive to those kind of motives, right? Rather than being told we're doing bad things. Anyway, so just a little bit of sharing on how we can take something that is locally available, adapt it, but make sure that that technology is then acceptable to community members going forward as well. Great. Thank you.
I'm actually going to ask all speakers to come back up and sit. Sorry. All speakers can now come down to the front to sit. We'll have a bit of a Q&A session. Time we're on. Okay. We have another 15 minutes. What do we have? Another 15 minutes? Okay. So we're going to open up to the floor for questions. If anyone wants any questions right away, I can begin. Hopefully, some questions. Is there somebody on the screen somewhere? Hi, that's me. Hopefully you can hear us if you're available. There you go. Perfect. Yeah. Excellent. Oh, sorry. Perfect. Question in the back.
Do you want me just to shout out? Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll stand up. Hi, it's Professor Katie Boyle from the Law School. Very much enjoyed all the questions and thank you so much. I think one of the things that I found particularly inspiring is the varied and diverse approach to innovative methodologies from each of our speakers, particularly engaging across interdisciplinary, embedding arts-based and really valuing and championing voices from Indigenous communities. And a lot of this is really pioneering, so I'd love to hear from this is open to the floor for those that have engaged in that work. What is it that you take as sort of part of the pioneering work that's been going on, and where would you love to go with it next in terms of your research objectives? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. I think for some colleagues who had used part of these methodologies before, this has been kind of a progression. But I think that the pioneering part has been having other colleagues joining into the effort, seeing how that would change their own research practices, and then having experiments of those methodologies across scales or looking at the learning relevant for other countries. And this is still an ongoing process. And I think there's two things that we're doing in terms of moving forward. And partly it's been really helpful, thanks also to the pandemic and the fact that we were able to share a lot online about the work as we were going, has been receiving different sources of international recognition of our work. That has given a lot of support, and I think also legitimacy, particularly maybe more complex local realities to the researchers to see their work recognized. And moving forward, I think there's a part of the research that some colleagues also here at Strathclyde are involved in, which is recognizing how these methodologies, they're not just like good research, but they're actually a human rights practice. It's not a nice to have and something that we all must do as researchers, as governments, as stakeholders, to really be able to understand what the issues are in sustainable development and find an appropriate, effective and meaningful way forward. And this in itself has been research and in fact ongoing research. The second part is also looking at how this may become, again, something that is more supported by funding. And I think we were lucky that our kind of funding allowed us to experiment a lot, to be iterative in our research design, and everything we learned, we were able to then shape the next research going forward. Almost every year we had a cycle of learning and evaluation. And part of what we're learning and trying to convey is actually tell research funders, but also sustainable development funders, climate funders, health funders, if you wish meaningful work to go ahead with co-development of knowledge and tools, you need to set certain conditions in place for this to even be possible, for those methodologies to be possible. That has to do with, I think, an iterative research design that is shaped time and again on the basis of what we're learning from each other, and particularly from indigenous and local knowledge holders, children, women, who are part of those methodologies, because the learning is incredible at every single stage, and we need to be able to adapt what we're doing as we learn. And in many funding opportunities, you don't have that flexibility. You are tied up to certain outcomes or even outputs that you need to establish at the start, and very often you don't even have the time to have meaningful, start to build meaningful relationships with those that will work with you, or even have time to connect with researchers that have built those relationships over decades in particular geographical localities. So I think a big barrier is the funding opportunities, and changing those to allow this work and others to experiment with these methodologies is essential.
Just if I can build on that, what I particularly heard in your question was what may the future hold for us and how do we see this evolving? And in what I spoke about, I talked about integrating to policy frameworks and so forth. And actually, I see that as part of sort of the hospice care for existing institutions that are failing. And 70 years ago, a futurist thinker said that 50 years ago, a futurist thinker said that in 70 years, the institutions that will have failed so dramatically that you won't recognize them. And so that was 50 years ago, and that there's 20 more years left. I think we can see how our institutions are falling down. So thinking beyond hospice care for failing institutions, it would really be building up governance structures that are translocal, that are decentralized, that are replacing typical public functions that we've expected from the state or from Strathclyde University or from whatever other institutions have nurtured us, but are sadly failing to meet the challenges. So it's thinking about how to build up decentralized governance structures. My answer to your beautiful question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated. I think reflecting back on a Strathclyde side, maybe Katie a wee bit. I think for me, what I would like to see is a different way of thinking as researchers in general, but as an institution for really wide-ranging faculties that at the moment we don't necessarily use the strength of as well as I think we should. You sit here, a group of people from different faculties, but more of a coalition of the willing who found themselves. What did you say earlier, Jeremy? You found your people. But sometimes that's hard to do, and it would be great to see that more embedded in the way that we think about research in general as an institution. So if I'm thinking about a new technology or something I want to develop, who are the social scientists I need to talk to? Who are the people who have science and the health economics things I need to be talking to as well? And breaking down those barriers that Lisa said about disciplines, but also about sectors. I think we still have a terrible colonial way of thinking that we're going to bring knowledge to the African partners or our partners in the global south, when I've learned more from my colleagues in Malawi than I've learned from a lot of my colleagues here at Strathclyde about transdisciplinary working, how to work across sectors, how to work with communities, to listen to those voices. And I think we need to see the strength in that, what we can learn from the global south. I hate that term, but when you said me, coming up from there too. So I think that as an institution looking internally, because I'm wearing my centre hat now, that's what I would love to see come out of all of this. How do we use those strengths in some of this research to
I'd like to build on from that as well. Coming from another part of the world just to have this space here is incredible. I should be doing that back home. So I think for me, it's about the building out, but building within localities as well, that they can be confident to carry out these methodologies and it's okay.
Introduce yourself and then.
Hi everyone, my name is Malin Wudeni Samuel. So I'm a PhD candidate at the Classes School of Art, but funded by the One Ocean Hub. So I work with the One Ocean Hub office team. I have a question for Jeremy. Just correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing that Norwich works with medicinal indigenous knowledge, since your background is. So I want to know whether with you or the community leaders that in all of if they've had any hesitation. I'm not so sure if the community leaders are the ones hearing the knowledge of the, or if they've been collaborating with the other knowledge holders in their community. But if they've had any hesitation from people. Because we all know the role is that big challenge that we have with misinterpretation of knowledge or knowledge reach. So when people making, what is it called, rights for the knowledge when it comes from our communities, so I say some of these challenges.
Thank you. And with all respect, could I pass that question?
Sure, yeah, hi. Thank you. I'm Jordan, everyone. We work together on Nourish. It's an amazing question. So actually what we wanted to do is to find something that held everyone's knowledge and culture and practices together, and that was food systems more generally. So we don't really work food systems, indigenous approaches to agriculture as a means to address the polycrises that are sort of hurting communities across climate, health, livelihoods. So it's less about medicinal knowledge and more about food systems. But more generally, I think there has always been a tension between this sort of privatization and intellectual property. A lot of the way that we work is aligned with sort of open source software all the way through to this idea of plural knowledges. So the multiple ways of being and doing can be held at once. And so we haven't run up against like that specific resistance, because the type of work that we're trying to do is more around what are the top 3 actions that you can do in food systems at the local level that then can be geared to make a global policy case. But there is always that tension of essentially like extractive knowledge system that we always hold. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else like to come in on knowledge and knowledge hierarchies and the sort of extraction of knowledge across communities?
You should, David.
I'll just say it, Chair. No. But if anyone does.
Sorry, I'm particularly interested to this question because of the framework that you said to adopting in your project. So, I mean, the existence, particularly around sort of like the ideas of decolonialism in literature and projects and policy as well, is to recognize. So I don't know, prioritizing those 2 knowledge systems equally, I'm wondering how you contend with that, because indigenous knowledge system, the inclusion of indigenous knowledge systems has to happen because of the power dynamics that exist in knowledge framework. So, you know, it's quite interesting to me that you sort of perceive both these knowledge systems equally. So yeah, I'm just wondering how, I mean, how dynamics sort of part of like this understanding of adopting this 2-eyed approach.
Well, I mean, I as a white man, you know, I've had to do a lot of unlearning, and I'm still in that process, right? It's not easy but you know, I think what serves in from my perspective, just speaking personally, if I could be vulnerable for a second, is, you know, humility, curiosity, openness, and love, really, is really what draws you out, you know, and beyond yourself. A lot of the frameworks, really, you know, I would have to credit Jordan, who's just spoken about. But you're talking about this Western dominance, and this is it is something that we struggle with, to be honest. Even just in how somebody is in a room, the volume of their voice, when they speak, how much they speak. It's something to pay attention to. I'm sorry, I don't sound like I have very formulated thinking on that. And Jordan, if you want to jump in with, somebody who's really perhaps, traveled in those circles, longer and deeper than I have.
Just two things to say, and one is thinking. I thought immediately of something like Donna Haraway, the eco-feminist writer, says, which is we have to stay with the trouble. In that, like, this work is not easy. We have to be there, and like decolonial practice, I think, is in its early days, where like what I see most effective is actually really something very pragmatic rather than theoretical and idealistic. So just trying to struggle through, but also be practical rather and draw on these different sort of threads as much as possible rather than hold to one sort of thing bullishly. But I mean, I don't know, Lisa, maybe you can speak more to that from your perspective.
I'd like to chime in as well, because for me, the methodology, I use this because of that, so that I can avoid them seeing me as an educated person. And so the Ununu process, the setting itself allows for everyone to be seated as equals. And the conversation is not something that I start. It's something that they start, and it goes wherever they want it to go. So I do not push what I want to know, but I wait and the biggest part of it is being patient. Because it can take weeks before you come back to what you want to know. And then when you get to it, it may not be important anymore. Yes, so I think important is the methodology you used. I had to ask my mom so that she picks one that's respectful to her people.
Also, I wonder perhaps if you might want to come in on that as well. I'm just thinking about with the documentary, I remember you discussed the fact that this was from one perspective in many ways, or a few different perspectives, but there was different perspectives in the community. So I just wanted to ask about how you sort of navigated that or your perceptions on that.
Yes, sorry, it's a bit difficult to keep track of all the conversations in the room with the sound. Yeah, but very, very interesting questions that's coming from the floor. Yeah, I think I just want to echo what everybody already said, that, or especially what Jeremy also pointed out, is that I think decolonial praxis is difficult. It's a process, and I think we're all learning. And definitely working, for example, in my case now as a Namibian, working in the work, let's say with the current different members of the current community, you are faced with a lot of questions around, the politics of representation, whose voice is coming out, who's speaking for whom, but also these asymmetrical power relations around different knowledge systems. So I think even when we talk about indigenous knowledge, it's often a category being kind of thrown around, but really addressing what that is complex, and how we integrate it into governance systems, especially because a lot of it is praxis-based, it's very situated. But yeah, basically in terms of the documentary also, because this is a very diverse and scattered community, they also have histories that are both indigenous, that are also creolized. I think it's important to maybe just say that this is not necessarily a film that's representative of the broader whole community, because that would be impossible anyways to make such a film. I think it's I think important to always situate it that it's coming from a particular perspective, and that it's the rather aim of the documentary is to in fact facilitate dialogue, not only between the community and outside actors, but within the community itself, discussions around diverse pasts, contested pasts, and then of course also reimagining the future collectively together. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that. But it's definitely an ongoing, I think, learning process in terms of thinking around Indigenous knowledge. I would love to have more discussions around that when I can maybe see people in person.
Please.
Thierry Berger from International Institute for Environment and Development. Really great to hear about the amazing research which is being done. I'm interested in concrete results, whether talking about hearing voices from communities, whether you can really report on success, where lots of communities have been heard by policymakers, have policy change in their favor. I think I've heard already about the work in South Africa with the Shell disputes. That was really a great result. Whether you already, I know it takes time, but
yeah, I mean, that's a question that we're asking ourselves, because in a way, even in that Shell case, you know, there've been appeals, there've been reactions within the oil and gas business community about how to go about getting those licenses in a different way and overcoming now the new legal standards that have been defined by judges. And even if you ask our colleagues about whether they feel they've made sufficient concrete results, they feel that those victories are very ephemeral and there's even harder battles ahead. So I think that there's an understanding that, you know, this is a process. These are relationships that have been built. And I've actually changed my mind about what is a concrete result of our work. I think that, first of all, those where we have built through that knowledge co-production process, new alliances, and new ways of working. In South Africa, for instance, been incredible how in the course of 3 years, during a global pandemic, researchers and legal aid NGOs and indigenous and local knowledge holders have created a nationwide coalition that wasn't there before. And that in itself changes everything. I mean, and yet they're still fighting all the battles they were fighting before, but in a very different way, with a whole different understanding of how to strategize about it, how to see the system behind the multiple threats they're facing, and a sense of what resources may be brought together with this new way of working. And I think governments have been observing. In some cases, we work more closely with government. In other cases, well, as you can imagine, with litigation, then the relationship with government has changed. And so even then, I don't think we can point a policy change at the national level, but we can see, we have learned, I think we have learned how to go about pursuing change moving forward. And there will not be the one, you know, legal reform or policy fix that will make everything better. But I think we have a different sense of how to pursue that change. I mean, in a way, paradoxically, we've made more distinct policy change internationally. And again, in areas that we weren't necessarily planning to work on very clearly from the start. So what we've realized is that the assumptions that SME mentioned at the start about how the ocean is not relevant, is devoid of people, is not so relevant for human rights, has completely changed in the last few years, not just because of our work, but certainly there have been instances where, for instance, we participated in the development of the new UN guidance on children's rights to a healthy environment, which was very focused on climate change. And we were the only voice in the process saying, well, you can't go ahead with this without making some reference to the ocean, to biodiversity. And that happened, again, in a relatively short period of time while we were still starting to develop and capture our research on children's rights and methodologies with children. And the same is true for other international processes. And I guess that, again, you know, it's not a concrete outcome because we have to see now how that will hopefully trickle down to the national level, whether that will, again, marshal new resources and alliances across scales that can help the work at the national and local level. But a lot of it was very unexpected. And I think what we realized is just understanding what may be moving at which point. And then the next question is, okay, how we then build on that and mobilize for the change we're trying to achieve at a national and local level. And just being, again, very iterative in our thinking about what are the concrete results we're working towards.
Yeah.
Add on to that with the work in Solomon Islands, probably I would not say because of the work, but probably because of the conversations, the numerous conversations we've been having and returning to the reality of the place. It had caused twice for the ocean planning process to be paused. Just because leaders have said, no, we need to bring in our reality into this process. We have also shifted in terms of new donor fundings that are interested to fund this kind of work.
Time for maybe one.
I always like when it comes back to, when it all comes back to common law. Like the dialectic. That's exactly what I hear being discussed, because you say that everything is variable. I mean, when we talk about indigenous, for example, I have to ask the question, what is really, I guess, what is indigenous when there is access to internet? That's what PK would say. You've got internet now. And at what point is, number one, capitalism, and number two, the internet changing the roles? I was thinking about Namibia. How many of the native people would actually want to go, for example, to the sea? For example, in the same issues we have here, where farmers' offspring do not want to go into farming. Because there's a change that the indigenous farmers in Britain, their offspring say, get me out of here. I'd rather be want to study economics and become a banker.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea of the dialect is really important here. And it's not, I think it's none of our contention that Western rationalist knowledge or indigenous knowledge should be sanctified as such and upheld as the sole standard. But really it's that thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's the parallax of having the different viewpoints where there's the possibility of new creation. And I'm continually struck by the indigenous thinkers that I encounter, their humility, their openness, their willingness to learn, and their leaning out, if you like, to embrace other perspectives. So, that I think is, just building on what you said, is something that really is quite clear to me.
One final question over yourself.
Hi there. My name is Jazeb. I work with the University of Glasgow as an RA. My question is regarding collaborative work. Yes, we're all here from different disciplines. Before coming to Glasgow, I used to work on a project where we have different industries, chance to work them directly. Now, what they look is they always focus like on the short-term gains. For example, the financial benefit, the economic benefit. For them, the social policy, climate policy is not really like, that important, considering what they're trying to produce from manufacturers to different, councils as well. So my question is, how do you engage like in that collaborative environment to give your message coming from the non-technical background, that what is going to be the output of the whole, the ocean hub, and what you're trying to achieve and how are you going to do that, keeping them on board as well, because you can't ignore them. That's the reality.
And start. Well, I think one of the first things that maybe was quite a game changer for the natural scientists working in the project, and maybe some of the lawyers, is that not all actors have the same powers, and some actors have used their powers in a way that have time and again, marginalized and precluded sustainable development. And that realization means we can't just treat everyone equally as for researchers. And so that means also that maybe in some cases, you might not keep all business on board with your work. You might do work that may be disruptive. You may do work that may be about regulating, eventually regulating things and so on, moving away from some of their practices, even like a whole things in the sector, because it's what we may see in because that like the possibility of that change, changing business dynamics related to the short-term gains are seen, but the power dynamics in which you might even try and do that are such that you risk just being part and, without realizing or realizing of ongoing unjust processes. So it's really, that doesn't mean you wouldn't want to work with and learn also from business and really understanding where they're coming from. But I think with that as deep understanding about how particularly certain business enterprises, certain business sectors have such a power and have used that power in ways, still planning to use that power in ways that is inherently contradictory to what we're trying to achieve. That requires working differently and also thinking about certain policy processes. I think in our case, it's been very spatial planning, moving away from that idea. This is a process where each sector should be accommodated, for instance. And how you devise way to do that, that's the challenge, that's where the research comes in. But I think it was important from some researchers that had been active in policy and had been very much and been supported career progression through that understanding that we should treat everyone equally. That was a big and also realizing that again from a human rights perspective, they have a duty to do so. This is not just something that they may try to do or not. They are very much legitimized to be discerning about who has power and how they use power if that contributes to human rights violations or negative impacts. And so that has been also very powerful to realize, well, this is not just, again, an open choice, an open political choice. There are clear and clearer standards of conduct and evidence, including from their own work, that they didn't feel necessarily able to bring to the fore in a certain way because of that perception and understanding that they needed to be neutral.
And it's also there are becoming more and more obligations, I would say, more pressure from investment banks and things as well on industry and business that they need to take these things into consideration. So I think there is that balance that it's not very both enough pressure coming.
And I would just add, I think in some of these negative actors, they're institutionalized. They're not always monolithic. They're not always internally consistent. And there are disruptors that we can find and activate.
I think we're losing some of our speakers right now, so I think we should let them off the hook here and just thank them one last time for their presentations and for